So, everything should be working fine if I am not wrong. In case I am wrong, I still need to check, just in case, But everything should be working fine, no? Do we have audio? Do we have? Oh no, okay. We have working audio. So, what? Ah, yeah. There it is. There it is basically. Hello, everybody. Once again, we are all of us here, congregated in another particular occasion to learn a little bit more, to keep mm, deepening our understanding about reality itself. Therefore, we have a necessity to fulfill. We have a task to complete. We need to study more. And because of that same reason, we're going to go deep once again and to keep exploring what was already said before. In this particular occasion, as always, thanks for being here, everybody. Thanks, Lurker. Thanks, both watchers. Thanks, everyone. And in particular, thanks, Street Panso and Runspoon. So, yeah, welcome basically. Well, what happened was, if I am not wrong, I left the video like at half of it or something like that because I was kind of feeling sleepy. I didn't really mean to go to sleep so early, but somehow it happened, let's say. So I ended up feeling like we needed to go to sleep, or I at least. I don't know what the rest. I needed to go to sleep. I was I was in the middle of the lesson, closing my eyes, and I stopped here because I think from here to here, almost I spent the whole, how much? 2 or 3 minutes that this guy was speaking, almost falling asleep. So yeah, now that I am not physically exhausted like yesterday, we are going to see if I can do something and if we can learn anything at all, instead of worrying ourselves with the stuff that doesn't really matter, probably. But yeah, we left it on the middle of the lesson. Now, as it says over here, we are learning about reinforcers. So yeah, let us start, please. Once again,
So
is it on?
let's talk about that just for one moment. So we can talk about primary reinforcers like food, thirst, or pain, things that go with life, right? Pain, not being injured, food, and thirst. We can talk about secondary reinforcers that we know a lot about. Money, attention of other people, praise from other people, admissions to places you want to be admitted to, promotions when you want to get them. There can be positive or negative rewards. And I'm going to talk about one thing, but just for a moment, the behaviorist said anybody can learn anything, right? We'll come back to that. So that's been a big debate, whether anything can be equally learned with any other thing. And the other thing that's striking is, B.F. Skinner particularly said that we have an illusion of free will. That all we are learning these things. We might as well get over our illusion of free will. Scientifically, it's very hard for even the best scientific psychologists to tell you whether free will exists or not. That's not something that's easy for us to begin to imagine how to measure. But these kinds of learning things are very impressive in many ways, and we'll talk about some of that.
Okay, I think so far, even taking into account that the objective of the talk itself is to go over ways in which lessons can be learned and knowledge can be even more efficiently absorbed. Is it really necessary to discuss something like free will? I mean, the main thing that he already said, the teacher, is you can't really consider free will as something so easy to analyze. But I guess probably in some cases, trying to add that concept a little bit, let's say, spark a tiny amount of the free will over anything is better than to directly not even mention it. Probably, I don't know. So I guess that is a reason as to why it might be helpful to mention it. Probably, I do not really believe it, but probably. So yeah, continue.
Okay, so let me talk to you about one way in which, for example, casinos get people to come back often, and other things in life, okay, without giving you money every time, because then they wouldn't make money, right? So your book talks about a number of examples of this, but I'll just pick one: partial reinforcement. So this means when do you get in these animals, when do you get a reward? Every time, or only a third of the time? So of course you learn faster if you get a reward every time than if it's a third of the time. You're not quite as impressed and excited. But here's the interesting thing: if you stop giving the reward, these animals will go on for quite a while before they extinguish. These animals will extinguish right away and stop responding. Why will these animals keep behaving for a time even though you've entirely stopped the rewards? Yeah?
Since they only got it like 30% of the time anyway, it seems plausible to them that it would go a couple more times without them getting it.
Yeah, since they only got the answer, was right. They only got it 30% of the time, so they're gonna, the first one or two non-payments, right? They're gonna go, well, it's coming up next. Okay, a couple more. Okay, coming up soon, until they finally decide that the whole thing is over, right? Okay, so it's very interesting, the different reinforcement schedules, how they relate. You might think, well, you always learn better if you reward more, but in some cases, if you want to get people to keep doing stuff without direct reward, partial reinforcement is actually more powerful.
Yeah, I mean, it is what was mentioned before. When you give the possibility, or not that you give the possibility, rather the opposite. When you exhaust the possibilities of people getting the rewards in such a consistent manner, the thrill of not getting it is also something that makes the not simply the individuals, but rather on a deeper level, the animals who are beyond every kind of yeah, every feeling similar to this one also makes people or gives people the motivation, let's say, to somehow, well, not somehow, to because they want to have a better understanding of this particular thing. Because in this example, it was casinos, but it can be applied almost to any kind of um, thing in general that utilizes this method of not being so reliant or not so reliable. When you have the possibility of failure, you also need to adjust the way in which you look at that object. And because we yearn to properly grasp fully every single thing that appears in front of us, we end up deciding not simply to watch, to observe, and to comprehend, but also to have a fully detailed, if it is possible, fully detailed explanation of what is it that makes these things go wrong, or at least how we could properly take advantage of them if it is that we can't simply observe them and say, yeah, this works in this way, and that's that, let's say. But yeah, I think it makes it makes sense basically. If you if you never give mm, the possibility of things going wrong, those who interact with what you created will know that for sure what you made will never fail. But if you insert the probabilities of failure, the probabilities on an even bigger success, and yeah, in general, variability in whatever it is that you're creating, it has more, not possibilities, it has more inner potential to be interesting, let's say. Some individuals will nonetheless still not be caught up in what you created, even if it was the most randomized anything, and others on the opposite end, because it is so incredibly complex and because it has so many possibilities for everybody to try and deep dive almost on the thing that you made, they will get almost what is it called? Attracted to what you made for the sake of properly understanding it, as I said before. So yeah, I think fine so far.
Now we're going to move into a dog experiment, and then directly to start thinking about people in our own lives. So this is a famous experiment at the University of Pennsylvania from Seligman. In this case, he used dogs. It's been done with many species in many circumstances. And he put them in a hammock. So there's two dogs on two sides of a thing that they walked around, and they don't see each other. The dog A would periodically get a shock, and he could stop the shock by pushing a panel near its nose. Okay, as soon as the shock came, he could turn his nose and stop the shock. Dog B on the other side of the divider would get exactly the same shock. It would stop at exactly the moment that the first dog stopped it. But dog B had no direct control, okay? Equal number of shocks, equal duration of pain, so of objective pain, if you want to call it that way. One animal has the capacity to stop it, the other does not. So that's the first part of the experiment. The second part of the experiment, they're put into a shuttle box. It's just a box with a big divider in the middle. And they're just hanging out there, and then they hear a tone. At first, it means nothing to them. And then comes a shock on the grid on the floor, okay? And at first, they don't know what to do. But after a while, they get smart like the cat, and they jump over the divider to the other side, and it's all okay. So you can imagine that when they hear the tone, pretty quickly, what do they learn to do? Jump over the divider and stop the pain. And here's the remarkable thing. For the animals who had the experience of pushing the panel stop the pain, they learned that pretty quickly. For the animals who could not stop the pain initially, they don't learn how to escape when they could. It's as if the animals in group B, what they learned about life is that it's painful and you can't do anything about it.
Well, I mean, in a sense, I hope that one of the best ways to show this is also the experiment that includes rats, and in which those particular rats also play, I don't think simply the role, but rather have the possibility of being saved or not if they last for enough time in a water tank. And one thing that also was observed there in the case of hope is if you periodically show the rat that you're going to save them, they will surely keep striving for the sake of a possibility of survival. While in the other hand, if you never give them any hope in particular, it is almost a guarantee that no rat will last for half an hour swimming or being afloat. So yeah, I hope it is mentioned more properly, because if it is something important to talk, hope in the case of learning, it might as well be the best example that I know.
Right? The
That
animals in
one.
group A learned pain happens, but I can do something about it.
Mhm.
So here's the animal, at first it doesn't know what to do, getting the shock, but with trials, the animal learns to jump and jump so quickly that it doesn't have almost any problem. Here's the tone, boom, it's out of there, okay? It learns to avoid the pain. But what happens to the animals who either had the escapable shock or the ones, right? The ones who could poke their nose, they also learned this. The ones who could jump over, there's nothing preventing them from learning that. They just, don't escape. It's what Seligman called learned helplessness, that the animals learn from the first experience, their conclusion was, pain happens and I can't do anything about it. And then when they get in a second situation where they can do a lot about it, they continue to feel helpless and not do something about it. It's like a deep lesson about life. Like, when do you think you can make your situation better? And when do you think there's nothing I can do about it? It's just bad, 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 okay? And so there's ideas about.
Okay, it doesn't seem that it is going to be mentioned, so I would also add that it isn't simply by one bad experience that we automatically filter out everything else that might or might not be really related, let's say, to the different realities that have to deal with, yeah, with almost all of this stuff, in which different conditions give or not the possibility of, mm, let's say like this, the different possibilities of saving oneself or not are so repeated that the animals learn they never had a chance of solving their problems on one side, and they were repeated to such an extent that they finally had to accept their helplessness, as it was mentioned here. It wasn't that simply on the first lesson, or in the first, or well, not in, after the first time that the dogs themselves were shocked, they instantly decided that, yeah, this is what is going to become my life. I cannot do anything about it, and that's it. I will have to live with these shocks randomly happening on me. No, it is rather they learn after striving so much, after trying so many things, and after failing for so many repeated amounts of time, that in, after trying no matter what, they will never have the possibility of really learning. And also, something that wasn't really mentioned is how it not only changes the outcome when you have a dog that learn to be helpless, but also how it changes when you have a helpless dog on one side, and on the other you have a dog that is hopeful. Because I will be pretty sure if the, let's say, the game almost was played between two dogs that had to jump the fence or cross the barrier one another, and to observe that if they do that, well, I mean, yeah, it isn't something that in kind of included a group factor. It was more like a dog was shocked and another dog was simply, or well, one dog was shocked and had the possibility of stopping it. Another dog didn't have the possibility of really solving anything. Simply they went through with their life, let's say. Uh, they were going to be shocked no matter what. So yeah, I think the fact of not considering a very important side of everything that is mm, herds, packs, societies in general as something that can also influence or hopefulness or, as it says here, helplessness might be another thing to take into account because it isn't the same kind of motivation that we create inside of ourselves when we are alone that than the one that we find invigorated when we are surrounded by people that are also striving to do anything in life, let's say. So yeah, I don't know.
That some of this might be related to people who struggle with depression, but also other things in life. So here's the idea from Seligman as an explanation of how we have resilience. The idea is that we all, get in sometimes in small doses, sometimes in tragically large doses, difficult things into our lives. How do we explain those difficulties that have happened to us, the setbacks we have? Do we think they're internal to us? I'm the kind of person who has bad luck. I'm the kind of person that these things happen to, or is it external? Somebody gave me a test. What can I do about that? But next week the test is over and life will be better, okay? Is it global or specific? Does it just seem miserable all over? Or is it just, one specific squirt in the face that this faculty member gave me, okay? Is it stable or unstable? Are bad things just seeming to happen all the time, or is it one occasion? And you can imagine that people who believe that bad things are internal, global, and stable will be learn to be helpless. Everything seems, dark and hopeless. People who believe that things are external, specific, and unstable think the next time I can do better. I can bounce back from this and do better. And it's not only in terms of the sort of spirit of people and trying to get people to, bounce back from setbacks. It's even things like job applications. So Seligman did the following bet. I don't even know what corresponds to it before, but there used to be an era when people would go knock on doors and try to sell you insurance. We don't do that anymore, right? Because if somebody comes to our door, knocks at our door, we're like calling the police, right? But when things were more calm, you'd open the door and talk to, or they would give you cold calls, which you don't get much more anymore these days. Have you even heard that phrase? You'd work at some insurance company and go, here's some random telephone numbers. You call them up and you try to sell them insurance, and like usually you get abused on the phone or somebody slams the door. But these salespeople, they make commissions and they keep going. And he said, let me give my test. He gave a questionnaire where the people interpret the world one way or the other way, the resilient way or the learned helplessness way. And you give your usual interview way for picking salespeople, and let me see who picks a better salesperson. And his questionnaire picked a better salesperson. Because if you have a sales job where people often, kick you out and hang up on you, you better be pretty external, specific, and unstable in your perception on things, right? Because when you have 100 people who hang up on you or close the door on you for one sale, you need to have a thick, resilient skin, okay? So lots of ways in which I think this speaks to how do we respond to the setbacks in our lives.
Well, I mean, obviously, going back to what was said uh, in the lesson itself, if you learn that your environment will, no matter what you try, reject you and negate from you the possibility of surviving almost, you will never even try to go beyond what you already know for the sake of finding different ways in which you could make it, let's say. But if, on the other hand, you learn that by sheer endurance you can create or you can achieve the objectives that you set for yourself, no matter how many times before really achieving whatever you will need to, yeah, almost you will need to fail. If you learn that the out, outlook that you are going to have is completely different, and you can obviously utilize that for the sake of, as it is said here in a show, if you learn that people is going to, no matter what you do, reject you, you don't have a chance of not, it isn't not getting angry, it is rather not really feeling bad things or something like that. While on the other hand, if you learned somehow that you didn't really need to integrate such a dark vision of everything for the sake of going on with in general any objective that you set up, as the word itself shows to you that by sheer amount of trial and error, things will at some point or another finally go right. When you learn that, you can finally work on the different problems that appear to you. If not, it is almost impossible for you to do it. Because, yeah, I mean, it also goes back to what I was trying to say before. The society in which you live also might play a role if they validate your view instead of trying to show you in different ways that it might not be the correct one, or it might not be the necessary thing to believe that somehow everything is so incredibly dark because you didn't, yeah, because something failed in your life and everything else will inevitably fail too, somehow, even though they don't really have any real correlation at all. So, yeah, I don't know. Continue.
Um, Let me talk about some limits to conditioning, and some of these I think touch also on what are the values by which we lead our lives. It's not going to be telling you that, but it'll make you think about some of the mechanics of what matters to you. So let me slide back for a moment. So the behavior said everybody can learn everything. Everybody can learn everything. In that sense, it was seen as a very democratic and egalitarian perspective. Everybody can learn everything. It's just how you set up the contingencies in the environment. And then Garcia did a famous experiment where he had rats get shocks or receive lithium chloride, which made them nauseous. And they either had a bright, noisy stimulus, or they tasted some sweet water. And even though these things were arbitrarily combined, the rats learned, who received shock, learned to fear the bright noise, the bright light and the noise. And the rats who got the lithium chloride made them nauseous learned to fear the sweet water. Do you see why? Okay. When we get nauseous, we think like, boy, it was noisy last night. Or what do you think when you wake up in the morning and feel nauseous? What's the first thing you think? Yeah, something I ate, right? We're prepared for internal nausea to think about food as a risk. And if it's a shock, we're prepared to think of something out there, okay? So these animals instinctively, not on the basis of the training, instinctively, said, if I feel a shock, it's probably related to this bright, noisy stimulus that warns me. If I feel nauseous, it's related to the sugar water. And they had these opposite patterns of learning for the stimuli, as if these animals were prepared to fear some things and not others. So it wasn't that everything could be matched with everything. And in fact, with humans, they've done things like show you pictures either of snakes and spiders or flowers and mushrooms, and then those predicted a shock, okay, a small shock to humans. And they measured your galvanic skin response and autonomic response. When you think you're getting a shock, you start to get a little sweaty, okay? And what they found was, and this will not shock you, they had better conditioning. You more quickly and completely learned that a snake or a spider predicts a shock than a flower or a mushroom, right? Even though objectively they were just as predictive. There's something about snakes and spiders that gets us ready for scary stuff, okay? And flowers and
Wait, I mean,
mushrooms, they really have to punish us before we think they're evil signals, okay? So
yeah, I mean, something kind of related to the whole human nature is you learn to be correctly afraid of the different predators that exist in your life because they represent a real danger. You wouldn't really feel like any kind of flower or any kind of mushroom will represent a danger for you if you never even learned that they might be dangerous. But by the simple nature that we have inside of ourselves that drives us to learn about different, more potential dangers in our life, like it is said here, snakes slash spiders. It means that in those moments you can truly experience or not that it means something bad is coming because you already associated a previously existing concept with another rather useful one. And in your unconscious mind, probably it makes more sense than if it were to simply be, yeah, a flower will predict danger.
again, a human example of preparedness. We don't learn everything equally. We're prepared to learn some things and not others, okay? Same thing with little Albert, the child that you saw. That kind of a film is a funny status, so we'll talk about a few more things this semester where that experiment, why should that experiment not be done? Yeah.
What?
Yeah, well, you would never terrorize a child, right? To scare the child, okay, so weirdly enough, though, these studies remain in the field because since we can't do them again, because we know they're not right to do, we try to learn lessons from them and, so that we learn something. The rat worked. Okay, he got scared of a rat, and then he got scared of a bunny, he got scared of a cat, anything animal, anything furry. But if they gave him a wooden block, that didn't work, okay? It's not everything. It has to be prepared from that. Here's another one that shows you that also...
Well, I mean, wait. Going back to this, the rat probably works because it is an animal. You can be, when you're a baby, your brain might probably associate easier or easily things that are living with the concept of danger, and it will be pretty hard to learn. That is why almost so many kids, even when they get old, that let's say fire could be a real threat to their lives, they still try to touch the fire, for example, because even to a certain extent, on the case of fire itself, you also have that particular property by which you can, for a mere instant, approach fire and not get burned instantaneously. So it also gives you the possibility of learning by facing directly fire. While if a rat were to beat you, you never know if you are going to, because of that, let's say, yeah, because of that wound, wouldn't you end up dying almost? I think it isn't simply that everything is so shiny and everything is so happily put together that a rat can become dangerous just because it is a rat. It is rather the property of being a living thing makes you more aware of the potential dangers that it might be. And when a test is conducted, like the Little Albert one, where the idea is to see how much of a shock you can create on a kid by simply associating things, it is more obvious that you're triggering actively and consciously the what I said before, the part in the brain that associates living things with danger. In this case, even harmful things almost as rabbits and rats to an incredibly loud noise. Or I think it wasn't something with shock. It didn't have anything to do with shock, the little Albert experiment, right?
Animal, anything furry, but if they gave them a wooden block, that didn't work, okay? It's not everything. It has to be prepared from that. Here's another one that shows you that also challenges simple ideas of, do we always learn simply to get a reward, okay? What kind of learning might exist that's rewardless? So there's 3 groups of rats in a gold maze. There's food rewards every day for one group. They're the happy group. There's no rewards for a grumbly group. There's a 3rd group that gets no reward for 10 days, and then it gets reward, okay? So one reward all the time, reward never, no reward for 10 days, and then you start to get rewards all the time. And here's what happens to the learning. If you look at this green line, that's the food that gets
I
rewarded all
can
the
see
time. So
shit,
they
man.
learn to go, they make fewer errors so they can get to
My brother, I can see shit.
their food
Fuck.
faster. If you look at the group that's never rewarded, this yellow line is pretty steady. It's like I'm hanging out, no
I
reason to
can
go
see
anywhere,
shit.
there's not much going on, right? Look at
Anyways,
the orange group. For 10 days up to here, they look like the yellow line, right? Not getting rewarded, I'm just gonna saunter around, there's nothing interesting to learn here. But boom, that first day that it's rewarded, by the 12th day, but just one day of learning, they're all caught up. They're all caught up. So the people call this latent learning, that they were really learning a lot about their environment, okay, anyway, even though it was of no use at the moment. And then the moment it became valuable information, boom, they're all caught up. It's as if they learned all this information that was ready to go. Latent learning, the information was stored up just because they were in the environment, even though it was unrewarded. And as we go around, we often pick up stuff, even though there's no direct reward. And then sometimes it turns out to be useful.
I mean, something that also happens is with almost any living creature, eh, creature, you learn to observe the different environments in which you exist, and because you, by the mere extension of observing things, start to formulate theories about what it is that you're observing, and because even more, as it is said here, you want to properly also grasp the different things that make you, not you, your reality be what it is. When a new concept that properly fulfills the maps of every meaning that you are observing also start to fall in place, and the whole puzzle makes even more sense than before, you can finally put or feel even more motivated, because in this particular case, if the rat learned that a reward was coming after some time, they will also learn that it is necessary to stay expectant of the reward no matter what happens, instead of simply not having any hope. Stay hopeful is the message here, basically. Learning about your environment and learning also how, in different ways, every kind of effort that you do, or at the very least endure, will also show you how you can properly give yourself a boost if we were to try and apply what is being said here in anything. So yeah.
People also love humans, including infants, contingency, the idea that we feel like we have control over our world. So here's a 2-month-old infant, a very young infant, in a little experiment where they put the infant in a crib, and above is a very colorful color mobile. And in one version, when the infant moves his or her head, there's a switch in the pillow, the mobile moves, and the infants are smiling and cooing. They love it. This is awesome. They move their head, the thing moves. Pretty impressive for 2 months. All they can do is wriggle their head, right? They're not walking or anything. They put another group of infants in who have no switch, and just periodically they turn on the mobile. There's no smiling, no cooing, and they equate the number of mobile turnings, okay? Why is that? Well, if it's just because you like the mobile turning, then you should have both groups be equally cooing and smiling or disinterested. But there's something fundamentally rewarding for humans, even at the age of 2, to feel like they have control over their environment and their pleasures. And that's not explained by conditioning. Nobody's getting anything more. They're both seeing the equal number of interesting turns, but one group feels like they're controlling their environment.
I mean, the sense, even if it is a false one, the sense of control makes you be happier because it is the same thing as the sense of understanding. You know that when you do something, the next action also happens because of your previous one. But if you were to constantly live without ever knowing what might come after your actual or future actions, you will never learn that it is important. Or well, I don't think it is that you will never learn to think that it is important, as I was going to say, to try and have more control. It is that simply you will learn kind of the opposite. No matter what you do, nothing will change. In the case of a child, if they learn that no matter what they did, there seems to be no connection with the crave playing or stuff like that, then why would they even try to keep pushing for it? As if, yeah, as it never changed how it by itself acted, no matter what they did. So yeah, basically that.
Here's another
Wait here, because for example, what I just thought, it might also have to do, for example, with the idea of trying to train. You can train a dog because you know that the dog is going to respond to you. No human on their same mind will try to train a fucking rock because you know that a rock, no matter what you do, will never change its state from being a rock. But the act itself of training a dog, even if at first the dog might not even have an interest in paying attention to you, comes from the idea of, well, maybe if I keep trying this for long enough, the dog will finally say, yeah, and will finally pay attention to what I tell this dog to do. But in the case of a rock, as I said before, you can spend hundreds of years trying to tell a rock to move. It will never happen. So yeah, let me drink water and we're playing this once again.
The one that I'm going to show you is an animal experiment where you can control things, but you can imagine in your own life, and in my life I see this all the time. It's nice when something pleasant happens in your life and your situation gets better in some way, right? You get a better iPad, right? It's but how hard is it emotionally when something gets worse? They take all your iPads away, okay? All right, when things, or more serious things, when things get worse, often we feel pretty miserable. And here's a neat example of that. So these are rats in a experiment, so everything's controlled. So here's one group of rats. This is how quickly they're running, so it's good to be high. One group of rats is constantly getting 1 pellet a day. Okay, so they learn what to do, and they're sort of hanging out here doing well. A second group of rats is the luckiest group of all. They get 8 pellets, and they learn more. They flatten out. Okay, so you get more reward. You drive the behavior more. That's not unexpected. The interesting thing are the 2 contrast groups. The contrast groups start off with 1 or 8, and then after a couple days, they're flipped around. So some started with 1, then they got 8 pellets. Others started with 8, then they got 1. Does that make sense? Okay. So here's the contrast group of 8. They're learning 1, they go 8, woo! Okay, all right. They're happy. Okay, they're getting 8. Their life's got good. Look at the group for whom life got worse. I'm getting 8. I'm getting 8. I'm getting 8. I'm getting 1. I'm getting 1. I'm getting 1. It really stinks. They're actually worse than the groups that got 1 all along. Right? This is the lowest line of all. They're protesting. This stinks. Okay, I was getting 8 and I'm getting 1. What a ripoff! What kind of world do I live in? Right? So the learning is protesting that. Now, by purely conditioning one, why would this group be worse? They're still getting a pellet. Okay, but because they're interpreting it as a world that's going downhill, As a worsening situation, they're less prone to learn it. They're sort of protesting in their learning. Things having gotten worse in the world.
I mean, in a sense, yeah, it is something that I just noticed. It is kind of hard to stay hopeful if you can't really rationalize about your environment and about the possibilities of everything going back into being somehow better. Because if you never saw it as something that could change for the better itself, why would you even try to keep going? Almost. That is why when rats were doing so great by having A pellets, they were overjoyed almost, or they were happy basically. And when you get stripped from those daily aids into a measly one, how are you even going to try and say, yes, I can keep going? As there is no way for you to see that maybe if you were to keep trying even more, once again, you're going to get a reward. And well, obviously, the opposite also is true. Because they saw that they could improve even more, they decided to stay hopeful. And because they maybe instinctually felt like the possibility of getting even higher than before, like not only raising to 8, but maybe even to, let's say, 9, even 9 probably says it is already another big improvement on their condition. So yeah, maybe, yeah, it is kind of weird, probably. So yeah,
A really interesting theme along the line of this reward, and an unbelievable one that's gotten a lot of attention, is delayed gratification. You know, if you think about it, and now this is not purely scientific, but there's a theme. Delayed gratification is a spectacular part of your life, right? Especially if you go through higher education, or maybe everything is like this, right? Do a good job in primary thing, and you'll get to a good middle school. Do a good job in middle school, you'll get to a good high school. Do a good job in high school, you get to MIT. Do a good job at MIT, and you go to med school or law school or become a teacher, whatever you want to do. Do a good job at that, and you'll get to this thing. Do a good job at that. Finally, thank you very much. You're 95 and you're done, right? Okay, all right. It's kind of like you guys are waiting a long time between the efforts you're doing and what you might consider a palpable reward. So here's a fantastically interesting study from Walter Mischel done at Stanford some years ago. These children were 4 to 5 years old. There were about 600 that were studied. They were mostly the children of faculty and graduate students at Stanford. And they would come into a room, and the experiment slightly varied. It was basically like this. They would sit in front of either a cookie or a marshmallow. They use different rewards, but imagine it's a marshmallow, or in the movie I'll show you it's Oreo cookies. And they were told this. And they tried to make this. Walter Michel's experiment describes how he played with kids to try to get them to make the cookie look like or the marshmallow look really awesome. Okay, and the kid would sit there, the 4 or 5-year-old, and they were told, "I'm going to leave the room now. And there's a bell here. If you really want to eat that marshmallow, ring the bell and just eat it. But if you wait a while, they didn't tell him it was 15 minutes. It was 15 minutes. I'll come back and I'll give you 2 delayed gratification. I can have 1 marshmallow now, or if I hang in there for 15 minutes and don't touch it, I can get 2. Okay." Let me tell you the result, and then let me show a film of this. And when I was looking on YouTube, the internet stuff, there's a lot of posed movies out there. This is the only one I found from Walter Mischel himself that's a real movie of real kids really doing this. I don't know why. All the ones are posed out there. But here's something astounding. Okay, so these are all pretty similar children of faculty and graduate. Children varied how long they could wait. And if they took, for example, the children who didn't wait very long, they could only wait 30 seconds until they ate the cookie. And they compared it to the children who could wait for the full 15 minutes to eat the cookie. These are 4 or 5-year-olds. When they looked at them at 18 and their SATs, they got the children who could wait 15 minutes scored over 200 points higher, which is a lot. That was in the days we just had 2 SAT tests. It was 1,600. Okay, and by many, many measures, in terms of educational attainment, in terms of health, and many measures, the longer you waited at age 4 or 5, the healthier you were, the better SAT scores you were, the further you went in school. Astounding correlations with real life stuff. And people are stunned by this. Partly it's, again, like, who knows what goes into that at 4 or 5? How much is the influence of parents? How much is the influence of cultures and genes? Who knows? But that fateful moment when the child goes for the marshmallow or not correlates with incredibly important outcomes in the future. So let's see, here we go.
well, yeah, I mean, something kind of funny that happens with this experiment, aside from copyright restrictions, is it also depends, or well, first and foremost, it also depends on if the kids were taught or not that they needed to wait by their parents, because that is something that you can also start to teach your child. And if it wasn't something that they had the necessity of learning and they develop by themselves, how much more that can be also changed. Because it is by having a consciousness you can also learn about this, and you can also try to extract and try to properly integrate something like this in your life for the sake of understanding how important it ends up being to learn to wait in general, as it is needed for anybody to commit to the act of waiting, mostly with almost every single thing in life, as almost no real effort really bears its fruits so instantaneously as we would like them to do. But yeah, basically that.
And you know,
Probably.
right? You know, in college, I remember personally, like it always was a battle. Like, am I going to have fun or study? Am I going to have fun or study? There's so many chances to have fun, and there's so many pressures to study, right? Well, studying can be fun. Learning is fun. Okay, how about when rewards harm? Again, these are things that are not strictly predicted by conditioning. I have 3 or 4 more.
Well, I mean, obviously, it was simply said in the go, but obviously, learning can be made something fun because when you ignite in somebody the passion of learning, they instantly acquire also the capacity of making it something fun. But in the opposite end, if you never teach anybody that it is necessary for them to do something like this, and even more, do it joyously, why would they create inside of them the capacity for such an action? So,
So rats love to run. If you have a hamster or anything like that, they love running wheels. What if you give them every time they run a food reward? Okay, then it turns out rats no longer run for fun. They only run when the food is given. Okay, if you start to extinguish, they stop running. So what had been a natural thing that seemed like a whole lot of fun, if it became the price you pay for a reward, all of a sudden becomes a chore. Okay, how about a widely cited experiment for Mark Lepper? He took preschoolers, so 4-year-old children, who love to draw. Lots of preschoolers love to draw. Then they started to give them, every time they drew, a gold star. You know, every time they got a reward. What happened when they stopped giving the gold stars? The kids stopped drawing. This is incredibly often cited in incredibly interesting debates about whether children in impoverished schools should be given cash rewards for studying hard. Okay? There's lots of debates about whether it's a good thing or not a good thing, an effective thing or not an effective thing. This study is often cited for arguing you make something that you should love, like learning, purely rewarded. The minute the reward stops, it becomes a complete chore. Okay? And
I mean,
you won't, but we don't know
wait,
how that applies. Okay?
okay, there it is. Yes and no, because there is a big difference between being a rat and, yeah, going back to what we tried to explain before. There is a big difference between being a rat, being a child, not knowing your world, and being not a real adult, but simply somebody who understands where they are standing. Because when you also learn that you are putting into risk the satisfaction that you gain from the things that you do, you also get the capacity of not making it worse because you already know and you already integrated into what you know that it needs to be something enjoyable, not to be sacrificed for the sake of, wow, let's see how much worse this can become. Rather, the opposite. You need to keep enjoying things. And if you do not learn how to do it, then yeah, it is going to be a problem. It is going to be an even bigger drama thing than what it is simply being shown here. But it isn't really that much of a real threat to anybody.
Because we might read about things like baseball player salaries, and it seems like there's a pretty good relationship between performance and salary, right? So it's not simply that way in the world. We know that often rewards are associated with high performance and promote high performance. It's pretty complicated. The last slide is about a fantastic debate that occurred here in many ways between B.F. Skinner at Harvard and Noam Chomsky at MIT, which is in what sense is language learned by conditioning. So here's an example against it. At 1 month, there's a switch inside a rubber nipple hooked to a tape recorder, and when the baby sucked, the tape plays. This allows the baby to perform, to behave. And they would play syllables from different languages, and they may or may not be in their own languages. And by 4 days, babies prefer the languages that they are exposed to. And one of the questions is, people said, well, how do we get kids to learn language from a behaviorist perspective? So one of the things that they studied children, and young children will say wrong things like "mama isn't a boy, he a girl." That's not good grammar, right? And so there was an intuition that parents would then go, "That's not good grammar," and sometimes parents do that. But when they did studies where they recorded, long sessions with parents doing this, parents almost never corrected. It was very rare. Okay, you may feel different from your own record, but statistically, it's very rare to collect. They often say that that's right or something like that. So, how is a child picking up language if nobody's giving them rewards and instruct in terms of whether they're right or wrong? The idea is that we can say an infinite number of sentences. Well, how can we possibly be rewarded or conditioned for an infinite variety of sentences? How could that work? And finally, the phenomenon of overgeneralizing. You may know that children will overgeneralize things because we usually add ed to make a verb past tense, right? But some verbs don't work that way. So you would say, my teacher held the rabbit. Children often make these overgeneralized rules. They say, my teacher holded the rabbit. So obviously they're learning a rule and then applying it to an instance that they never hear, because almost no adult says that. So they must be producing that not on the basis of conditioning, but Chomsky argued on the basis of sort of genetically prepotent ways in which we learn language, rules that we develop and figure out language in the world. I will say that for those of you who happen to be interested in this topic, there's been a striking pushback on that in what people call statistical learning. So as much as it seemed like a done deal 10 years ago, as I'm looking at, it turns out the truth might be somewhere in the middle with some genetic prepotentiation, but also a lot of learning from your environment, both.
I mean, obviously, it is necessary for anybody to also interact with their environment. Because if a kid that didn't have a necessity to learn rules for the different, in this case, language that they are learning, they wouldn't also need to learn that these particular rules might change in very specific conditions. As the example itself was, sometimes the ways in which a verb is conjugated is not the same that others from the same language are, as it is hold doesn't translate into holder, it translates into held. But when you are simply trying to make sense out of the world that you see, you can't simply, out of nowhere, understand that it works like that. Because you are just observing the world, how it is that it is out of nowhere going to make sense when a new rule is introduced. You need to satiate your necessity, or not your necessity, your interest into or as to why this particular thing works like this instead of being like this other almost unrelated side.
So anyway, so you can think as you leave here, what are the applause that you listen to? Where's your free will and your choice of what goals you pursue and what matters to you? And how does the world attempt to teach you things that you learn about what you want to do and why you want to do them?
So yeah, I think that's it so far. It was a very nice lesson. I am all I can really say is so far. Sorry for not being able to finish yesterday, but yeah, I think it was anyways good at the very least. So I couldn't really try to complain about anything in particular, as even more, it had the possibility of being properly, let's say, processed. So yeah, very happy so far. And well, I think we also learned finally the capacity of taking a break. We, as I said before, yeah, sorry for not finishing it fully, but yeah, we are going to see what happens the next time. Probably tonight I am going to try and find something, or for the next stream basically, to keep trying to go for a whiteboard stuff without really using this one in particular, as it is happening that the one I was trying to utilize somehow, I don't know how, or I don't know particularly why, somehow lags my whole PC. Because I was doing it yesterday without streaming and it did so. So yeah, I am going to try and find something better to utilize. But yeah, basically that's it. As always, thanks and well. Also, obviously, we gain the capacity of taking a break, of resting, of going somewhere else to do something else, less mind consuming. So, yeah, thanks for all. Stay safe. And well, when the next opportunity arises, whenever it is, know that we're going to get here once again and to do something. But for now, goodbye, take care, thanks for everything, and yeah,